COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard and Mike here Thanksgiving week with a real treat. We're going to talk to today a good friend of Veriten, a good friend of energy, a good friend of all of us who care about all these issues, Governor Mike Dunleavy from Alaska. He's been on the show with us before. Alaska is probably, when you think about the United States, it is the laboratory for energy production, use, policy, federal lands, technology, international activity, being close to Russia, connected to Japan. There's really no energy issue that doesn't come up, that's out there that doesn't come up in Alaska. So Governor Dunleavy, thank you so much for joining us. We've been very excited about this for a while, and we're delighted to have you today.
Great to be back, Maynard. I love being on your show and with Mike and others. It's a great conversation.
Well, it's super fun. We're doing this remotely. The other thing that's always fun is everybody loves in the office. You tower over me, Governor Dunleavy. I
don't know what to tell you, Maynard. It's a small world from my perspective.
Well, Mike, as we jump in with the governor, the markets. This will be a shorter week. What would you tell us about what's happening or what's on your screen?
Well, thanks, Maynard. I was thinking about the governor in Alaska, and I don't think I can get any further away from the governor than where I'm at right now. We're in the American Trade Hotel in Panama City, Panama. So we're spending our Thanksgiving here. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of arroz con pollo we'll be eating for this Thanksgiving. Anyways, in regards to the markets, they're all over the place. Last week they were down. Today, Dow's up like 500 points. And I think the reason the Dow's up now, even with shaky data out there, is I think this news that Kevin Hassett may become the next head of the Fed is pushing markets. You're seeing a 10-year bond yield now below 4%. We haven't seen that in quite a bit of time. So Hassett is considered a sort of an interest rate dove. And so I think what the markets are sensing is if he's put in here, we're going to have more than one rate cut at the December meeting. We're going to have potentially multiple cuts next year. And so that's why the market's moving. In regards to sort of oil, I think oil today is down to around $58, just under $58 per barrel WTI. And I think the reason is we've talked about this for, it seems like 6 or 8 weeks. It's this oversupply issue, right? I think this week JP Morgan came out and actually lowered, potentially said that we could have in 2027 prices below $40 a barrel in the 30s. And so, Goldman Sachs been talking bearish as well, for 26 and 27. So we just have that hanging over us right now. And all I would say to that is, yes, there is going to be an oversupply, whether it's 1.5 million or 4 million, like the IA says, we don't know. But right now, crude oil prices are holding in pretty strongly for that sort of like setup. And so maybe the markets know a little bit more than these commodity shops. So, and also today, what we also saw is people are starting to get maybe a little bit more bullish on this Ukrainian Russia, war, potentially getting some movement there. So it's been everything we've been talking about for the last 6 to 8 weeks, where we've got an oversupply of crude oil. That's for sure. Okay. The question is, how much is it going to be? And so what we've said for a long time is we're not going to make a price, prognosis here. We're going to just say that, oil prices are probably capped in the mid 60s for WTI. With this setup, we're not going to say oil's going to go down to 30 or 40 because we just don't know. We don't feel comfortable saying that. But that's the state of the markets right now. Maynard, more of the same, more volatility. But like I said today, I think the key thing is that people think that you're going to have a new head of the Fed. Interest rates are going lower. Market is reacting to that. I'd say this is a temporary thing. We have some many issues that we need to get over.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. That's a really good lead in. Governor, we haven't had the pleasure of visiting with you for a while. I was thinking, one of the really cool things you've done as governor is have those sustainability gatherings in the spring usually, and you've had great guests over the years. You talk about all the issues, and this year it's really phenomenal because you had Chris Wright, Doug Burgum, and Lee Zeldin all together there, spending time in the state, making some visits, talking about the issues, and then you interviewed them. That really jumped out at me. The Glenfarne News was big at the time, but I don't know. I was thinking that might be a great place to start because this administration, when we've talked to you in the past, during the previous administration, Alaska just felt like it was really being picked on in a lot of ways. And this is a whole new world. But let's start anywhere you want to. That one was just on my radar. Like, what a difference in where we are now compared to where we were.
Yeah, we were brutalized by the Biden administration. We had more sanctions put against 70 plus than the Biden administration had against Iran or Venezuela. I mean, it was absolutely pitiful what was happening to one of our own states, Alaska. Boy, I don't know where to begin. I mean, there's so much to talk about, and what Mike was saying had me thinking about a number of things too. But long story short, Alaska and Texas have similarities, but we have vast differences too. Texas came in as a republic, so there's very little federal land. Alaska came in as a territory possessed by the federal government. So 61% of Alaska's land is federal. I'm going to put that in perspective. That's about 222 million acres of land. That 222 million acres of land would be the second largest state. Texas would be the third. So Alaska is 2.5 times the size of Texas. You take that 222 million acres of federal land, that would actually be a second largest state, and then Texas after that. So just ginormous in every respect, vast amounts of resources. This was recognized by Seward back in 1867 when this was purchased, probably the greatest purchase ever for $7.2 million, 2 cents an acre. And we were compelled, and I'll be very brief because this is very important, only state in the country, Alaska was compelled by the federal government at the time of statehood to agree to collectivize all of its resources under the sovereign and develop those resources in order to pay for itself, because we only had about 250,000 people back then. So we have a compulsion to develop and produce. What happened is in 1970, the advent of Greenpeace, and as a matter of fact, Greenpeace was born as a result of nuclear tests in Alaska. They sailed from Vancouver to Alaska and Chitka Island to try and stop those tests. Ever since then, and an Earth Day, all of that happened in the 70s, there's been a constant attack on Alaska by agencies within the federal government. Because Alaska has this patchwork of land ownership. We have these convoluted laws that allow us to cross other pieces of land that the state doesn't own in order to have a viable state. So long story short, the Biden administration was absolutely brutal. Shut down ANWR, took NPRA offline. Took our force offline. The only thing they did not stop, ironically, was the Alaska natural gas pipeline progress. That was the only thing they did not stop. And they agreed to allow Willow to proceed on a couple wells. But other than that, we were getting wiped out. Go ahead, Maynard.
Well, I was just thinking, one of the issues, and it comes up all over the place. Arjun was in the Mideast last week, and people in the Mideast were talking about the way administrations, change policies, the way the U.S. is flip-flopping around. It comes up in the lower 48, I'm sure in Alaska, but it comes up a lot about projects being canceled, and whether it's Keystone or Wind, like how do you keep a legislative regime that is consistent? You've got the greatest volatility because the feds exert so much influence if we get a different administration, just like what you've talked about. So how do you lead the state when there's this Fed volatility in your life, I guess is my question.
Well, right now, because of the Trump administration, and you kind of nailed it, the Trump administration has been very favorable for Alaska for a whole host of reasons, going back to Trump 1.0. And that is they see this as a place of opportunity and solutions to a lot of America's problems and our Asian allies as well. And so I think we're going to have 4 great years. Now, the midterms, we're going to have to see what happens there, but I think we're going to have 4 great years. However, in order to make this long term, this has to be codified in law by Congress. In other words, lawfare and permitting have to be revised so that an investor in the world can say, where do I want to put my money? Is it America? And if so, why? And do they have long-term stability for my investment? So there have been some mining plays in America that take upwards of 27, 28 years to actually go from the moment the discovery occurs to the moment the ore is shipped. That is crazy, right? No investor wants to sit on capital for 28 years in the hopes of the prospects of getting some type of return. So this stuff has to be codified. It's concerning that there was a shutdown because we just burned 2 months of time in this Congress. We're going into an election year, so there'll be electioneering posturing, but lawfare has to be dealt with. The courts are helping us. The U.S. Supreme Court and other federal courts are helping us with the Utah case, Chevron, Sackett, you name it, clarifying some of those rules that help places like Alaska. But in the end, there's got to be something that says the only way an NGO is going to sue is if there's a legitimate health and safety reason, not because they don't like the concept of development. The craziest thing about those people is they don't seem to care about the environment overseas. They don't seem to care about how minorities are treated overseas. They don't seem to care about child labor overseas. They just want to stop what's happening in America. And I think Congress has to codify in there that if these plays are considered national security issues, which they are, look what's happened with rare earths and critical minerals with China, we've got to fix this for the long term.
You just said something that I hadn't heard others say, which is one of the effects of the shutdown was you couldn't do anything else. You took almost 2 months off the clock. Is that, I mean, I don't mean to get us into political tactics, but that was a devastating loss of time. Is that how you think about that political strategy?
I think it was a loss. I think it was a loss of time. I think it could have also had a corrosive effect on the relationships within both bodies and caucuses and so forth, which I hope hasn't happened, and I hope they get behind it real quick and move forward. But there's already rumblings about, looking at a new speaker and so forth. All that does is going to play into the hands of those that don't want change, that don't want the things we're talking about to take place, so that America has opportunity going into the future. You mentioned the Middle East. I was over in the Arab Emirates last year. Phenomenal place, terrific people. What a vision. Different system altogether, right? There's no lobbyists there per se. The elections are really, there's no real elections like we have over there. So they don't have to deal with the churn that we have over here in America. And that's why what I said earlier is vitally important. Lawfare and permitting have to be dealt with. If it's not going to be dealt with, capital is going to flow to those places that have more certainty. And we can't be the place with less certainty if we're going to win this AI race and this energy race.
Well, you're also, a lot of people, this is something that comes up is often people will say permitting. We got to fix permitting. And the counter is, well, it's not permitting. Don't be narrow. It's got to be the courts and the way the courts interact with permitting. That's honestly the bigger issue. Or let me ask you to just.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And you have to have courts that really embrace the Constitution at its core and at its foundation. What's happened is over time with administrations and just the different feel in America is there are people that believe that if something should occur because that's how they feel, they're gonna try and get people convinced that that's what the court should do as well. The purpose of the Constitution was to keep a standard in place that doesn't change with time. The Constitution itself, there's mechanisms to change that, but not the interpretation of things. And so Sackett, for example, I'll give you an example on Sackett. Alaska has got 65% of the country's wetlands. This is a very green, wet state. People don't understand that. Water everywhere, lakes everywhere, swamps everywhere, you name it. It is wet. Well, if you interpret waters of the U.S., they call it WOTUS, in a certain manner, 65%, probably more, 85% of Alaska was going to be off the table for development. That's catastrophic for a state like Alaska that as I mentioned earlier, is compelled to develop. Sackett came in and basically said, if you have a body of water, a pond, a puddle, a lake, and it doesn't have a nexus, a outlet directly to a water of the U.S., and I'm simplifying this, then it's not considered a water of the U.S. and it's just dealt with by the state. In other words, you could have activities there. So the courts we have now, the Supreme Court mainly, really, I think, is interpreting things according to the Constitution. But you've got to be able to have the courts in line, which we're starting to get, but you also have to have Congress send them laws that they can then hang their hat on. And right now, I'm not sure what's next on the agenda, but if it's not these permitting issues, and if it's not this lawfare issue, places like Alaska, other resource states are going to be becoming more increasingly concerned as to what's going to happen in the future.
This came up in a conversation last week, Governor. We were talking about policy, and maybe the WOTUS issue sort of illustrates it. A lot of these policies are better left to the states because every state is different and has, different natural resources, different industry, different, even different politics. I think Governor Stitt and Governor Shapiro are working on some permitting thing at the governor's level. You'll know much better than us, but do you have any thoughts about what's going on there? And when the governors are together, is that room less polarized and more practical? And should we be doing more things at the governor level? I guess is the question.
Yeah, it's less polarizing because as a governor, regardless of what your party, you still have to govern. You have to execute your laws in your state. You have to look out for your people. So it is a little less polarizing. I think it's a different dynamic, a different personality. The governors are. You brought up a good point. The state should be doing as much as they can to be competitive, and this is why federalism is very important. Texas is, in my opinion, in some respects, the gold standard for a state, meaning it came in as a country, came in as a republic. So it was not encumbered by this federal land issue. And so right out of the gate, it had a history of making decisions on its own, and it continues to do so today. And because of federalism, we can all look to places like Texas. There's some great things happening in Utah or Florida or South Dakota. The states are the laboratory for experiments in many respects. And so what Stitt is doing, Shapiro and others are doing, we all take a look at that stuff, and they look at what other places are doing as well. So in Alaska, we are also undergoing a review of our regulations, and we're looking at regulations in the context. Once again, is it a health issue? Is it a safety issue? And if it's not, does the overriding benefit to the public override an NGO or small special interest desire to let's see something not happen? So that's important. But the problem, though, the problem with the federal government is this: you still are reliant, especially states like Alaska, on the Army Corps of Engineers, 404 permitting, the EPA. Lee Zeldin was up here, and we had a great trip with him up here. He's up here for about a week, went to the North Slope, so forth. And I said, Lee, I don't think I ever thought I'd say this, but we're starting to like the EPA, right? Because the EPA has always been kind of the organization that kills things, kills opportunity, kills hope. So that's why I keep going back. If we don't get things codified, I've had investors, international investors, say this is great. This is great. What's happening in Alaska? It's got its own executive order. The president really likes Alaska, gas lines, so forth and so on. But what's the long-term look? Because we got to put money in place for long-term plays. And if it's going to be another situation where Biden says no gas exporting going out of the Gulf or going out of Alaska, what does that mean for us?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Governor, I appreciate you joining us today. I think maybe this is a question, maybe it's a statement, then maybe a question, but it seems to me that we've heard all about this permitting and stuff of this nature, and just seems to kind of go sideways. The biggest word we're now hearing is durability. I think you mentioned a little bit of that just a little while ago. It's like, okay, we might have Congress turn over here a year from now, and then there's no durability. Is that a concern for you? Is that the biggest issue as you see it right now? It's just durability, getting this stuff. And where do you think we are here? Are we ahead, behind? Do we need to start moving? What's your thought process?
Yeah, durability is huge. I mean, again, Alaska was given its marching orders at statehood in 1959, and the marching orders were this: we're going to give you a lot of land, we're going to give you a lot of opportunity, and you better use that land and opportunity to develop your resources to pay for your way as a government. Great, okay. Well, that durability didn't last for maybe a decade until the 70s, in which things were changed. You got to have certainty. This certainty costs money. If uncertainty costs a lot of money and opportunity. So durability, certainty, these things you can hang your hat on. we're not going to recapture rare earth and critical minerals issues from China unless we are able to change some of the stuff that we do here in this country for the long term. I'm talking about processing, which processors, refineries, make sure. I mean, California is shutting down a bunch of refineries. We've got to be building out more. And in order to do that, there's got to be certainty. There can't be any ambiguity. There's got to be laws and regulations that people can hang their hats on. If not, they're going to go somewhere else. And the world is going to become more competitive in this respect. And that's why places like China, they don't have to worry about EPA or Army Corps of Engineers or how their minorities are treated. They just do what they do, and they develop. I'm not saying that's what we do here, but just clear guidelines that are short and concise, I think, will help with certainty and durability.
You mentioned just a second ago rare earths, and I know I listened to Q3 call for Peabody, and they talked about rare earths at some of these coal mines, and it seems like there's a lot of momentum behind rare earths now, whether that's because of Trump administration or whatever. Maybe give us a sense for where you stand in rare earths. What's the momentum that you see in rare earths, and is this momentum real? And is this something that's not only going to be backed by Trump, but just future governments because it is a necessity, it's an emergency type deal? Maybe talk about some of Alaska rare earths issues.
Yeah, they call it rare earths, and you'll also hear rare earth elements (REEs). You'll see that acronym. And basically, what they're rare because they're not found in massive concentrated deposits. They're spread all over the earth. They're spread all over. So you'll see it in coal mining operations, gold mining operations, lead zinc mining operations. You'll find some of these rare earths that maybe at one time were not thought of as valuable because, again, we offshored things to China and we were relying upon China. But now, from a national security issue, we've got to identify as many of these rare earths as possible, but also be able to refine them and use them here in the United States. Rare earths, they go into things like magnets, electronics, and so forth, which are valuable for where we're going with the AI world, the electrified world. And so Alaska's got a lot of rare earths, again, spread all over the place. We've got a lot of critical minerals as well, spread all over the place. The concentration needs to be identifying them, processing them, and then, just like the strategic oil reserve, the federal government needs to do an offtake on these. In other words, they need to stockpile these rare earths so that we can get through some politically difficult periods of time. And I'll say something else which is fascinating to me, in which at first I thought, what does this really mean? But the more I think about it, I think it makes perfect sense. You saw where the federal government under President Trump bought into the rare earth deposit in California as an equity owner. Same thing happened up in Alaska with a mining outfit up on the Ambler Road project that we're looking at. Why is this interesting? To me, this is absolutely significant. If you can have the federal government as an equity partner, you get more alignment with its agencies. Think about this for a second. If the federal government owns 10% or 5% of a mining play, a gas line, et cetera, well, there's going to be more alignment in that administration when it comes to the EPA, Army Corps, 404 permits. In other words, we've had to fight these agencies on our own forever. But if we have a partner that's right next to us as part of a project and benefiting from that project, there's more likelihood that some of these agencies won't go rogue with their deep state and their bureaucracies because they are under the umbrella of the federal government. So I actually think that's a great idea, and especially for a place like Alaska, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I'd love to have the federal government come in and take an equity stake in the pipeline, for example.
Could I just ask you while we're on this philosophical point, if you will, because what you said makes total sense. It does seem like both parties, for different reasons, are drifting to more and more government direct involvement. And that trend in American life, I'm just curious what you think about that, because I know you're also you're a free market person, and just how do you think about where we are in terms of government?
Yep.
We just got a guy in New York City who said there's no problem government can't get involved with. I'm pretty sure I have that quote right. Like, we just talk to us about that border, if you will.
Yeah. So we've had government overreach, and in some cases, we would even say almost a dictatorial approach to Alaska from some of the agencies, to be honest with you. The agencies have played God with Alaska's future, like Army Corps again, EPA, et cetera. And so that's a problem. Buying into having an equity stake, as opposed to taxation per se, is different. It's not what people think, in my opinion. It's not socialism. It's not controlling the means of production. It's being a capitalistic partner with other capitalists in that particular infrastructure project or resource play. They're getting a return on it. But from my perspective, because of what's happened to Alaska, they, as a partner in that, we could say, hey, your agency in EPA or your agency in the Army Corps, Department of Defense, they're screwing around with this process and this project. And it doesn't become, it's no longer just theoretical or distant. There's an actual impact from a financial perspective on income that comes from that project that the federal government is now part of. So, you know, when Dami's talking about free buses, free grocery stores, free this, free that, somebody's got to pay for that, right? So you're going to be a tax serf in New York City if that comes to fruition. What I'm talking about is when the federal government buys into something, buys into it, that stabilizes that particular position. And you saw that happen with some of these mining outfits. Their stock rose because people understand that having the federal government with you as opposed to against you in a project stabilizes that and adds to the certainty that Mike was talking about earlier.
Mike also mentioned he mentioned rare earths, but mining more broadly, and I think mining is something in our experience which is generally less understood. We haven't done it in the U.S. for so long. We just haven't done it at the same scale. Talk to us maybe about mining. I know there was also some big potential discoveries, graphite and otherwise, in the news. Alaska. Talk to us about mining and how you see mining playing out, Alaska or otherwise.
It's got to be viewed, it can no longer be viewed just as an activity or an economic opportunity. It's got to be viewed as a national security issue for the United States. If we haven't learned from our offshoring to China, I don't know if we ever will learn. I think those guys the Chinese are laughing their way to the bank every single day because of the actions that we've taken. But you've got to have the metals, the minerals, the rare earths to be able to run a country and be able to protect and defend yourself. And those critical items that I just mentioned are at the basis of that. And so we have to look at mining as a national security issue. We do that with oil. We have a strategic oil reserve. There's a reason for that. We went through the Arab oil embargoes, and in case there's a disruption, waterborne oil, and this was pre-fracking and pre-Permian revolution. But nonetheless, that mindset had taken place decades ago. It has to take place with minerals and critical minerals, rare earths, and strategic metals. And so it's got to be viewed as a national security issue. If it's viewed as a national security issue, if it's like insurance, right? We have a house we want to protect. We're going to pay X amount of percent to ensure that if something happens to that house, we can replace it quickly. Same with strategic oil, same with strategic metal reserves and rare earth reserves. We've got to view it that way. If we don't view it that way, it's not going to change the paradigm that we have right now with the Chinese.
And I was thinking one of the lessons Governor, we've got this Thanksgiving show coming out. I don't want to spoil it, but it's about mining. But one of the things you learn you remember is when we mine in the U.S. and other Western places, generally speaking, we're going to do it to higher standards than it might be done elsewhere around the world. And so that's a win for everybody.
If you're an environmentalist, truly an environmentalist, not a subversive cloak in environmentalism. In other words, if you truly are an environmentalist and you're not those individuals that just want to see America weakened and eventual destruction of, but an environmentalist, you've got to ask yourself, what does offshoring these opportunities do for the environment overseas? It's destructive. Clear cuts, child labor with little kids with baskets on their heads crawling out of holes in Africa, a minority repression, dictatorships get funded. I mean, let's be honest, the Houthis don't have a first world economy, yet they're slinging missiles, high-tech missiles at Israel. Where do they get that money from? Well, they get it from their friends in Iran and others. So if you want to protect the environment and you want to help minorities and other peoples across the world, do it in America to the standard that we have. We have the highest standards in the world, and Alaska probably has the highest standards in the country.
One issue that comes up, whether it's mining or electricians, or you pick it, one thing that's constantly on people's minds, it seems like, is people, experienced labor, the sort of the workforce of the next 10 years and longer. Is there anything you see there? That's a place where states get involved, sometimes with training and all kinds of things. But what do you think about people power and where we're going to get all the bodies we need to do all these things?
Boy, it is. I got to tell you, man, we should do a 2 or 3 hour show, to be honest with you, because so much has happened since COVID. So, we often use the term BC, before COVID. You had systems in place, you had predictions that were in place, you had analysis that were in place, supply chains, who our partners were, global alliances, all in place. COVID comes along, it's all radically being changed, and we're in flux right now. We're in flux as to what we're going to be looking like here in the future. And what you just talked about is really a concept that really needs to be looked at, and that is where are we going to get the workers? What are we looking at as demographic decline really hits places like America, China? It's already, South Korea's their birth rate is 0.75. That's a doomed society. So where do we get these workers? Do we still have people retire at age 62 when the life expectancy continues to increase? It's a fascinating question. I would say that the advent of AI, to be perfectly honest with you, couldn't have come at a better time, because it's all converging with this demographic decline. If you were to get 10 young people in a room, like let's say age 20, and if you ask them how many kids they're going to have, I would bet you 8 of them would say probably none. That strikes to the Mondami abundance and affordability issue that he capitalized on. Young people living in their parents' basements. They have $200,000 in debt because they have an art history degree that they got a PhD in. They can't market those skills in the real world. They can't afford a house. They can't. So they're facing a world that they believe isn't working for them. You're going to have to, I think Mike Rowe and others are correct. We need to reemphasize blue collar work. We need to put the respect back in it, because it's what built this country, to be honest with you. We're up here in Alaska. We're going to undergo a huge initiative on training as many people as possible in these critical careers that we need for AI, data farm building, pipeline, you name it. And so I think a retraining of the workforce that we have now, if those folks are interested, I think those opportunities will be there. I think technology and robotics are going to have to move even faster. And the problem with the demographic decline is this: Japan and Korea both have spent billions upon billions upon billions of dollars to try and reverse that. But once that mindset gets baked into the culture that kids are a problem, kids are a burden, kids cost too much, it doesn't turn it around. And so I think we're headed into a long-term demographic decline unless there is some incredible revolution in terms of value sets for people. So I see older people working. I see people retiring later. I see immigration having to be key. I see robotics. I see AI, et cetera. It's all got to come together quickly, or we will not attain that standard of living that we believe all of this promises.
Well, that was.
Is that heavy?
Well, that was very impressive. You ticked off all those ingredients to that casserole, and it's a complicated one. Really, it must be top of mind. You answered that with so much passion.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, one more from me while I was just thinking out loud here. Governor, everybody's been talking lately about affordability. Power prices come up. There's all sorts of inflation. We've got a Fed meeting in early December. This is the stew. It seems to be like that's going to be central to the election next fall. Who knows? That's forever away. But what is going on with prices in Alaska? And one thing we hear about is natural gas in the Cook Inlet area and the need to get more in there. And maybe you guys will import a little LNG, but maybe just talk about those issues for us.
So Alaska's always been a high-cost area. We're basically a county in terms of population. Imagine a county at the top of the world. So we are thousands of miles away from market. We are miles away from infrastructure. We can't wield in power. We have to develop our own power here in Alaska. And so Maynard, I think we talked about this at one time. Alaska pioneered LNG export in the world in 1969. We built the first LNG export plant that continuously sent gas to Japan for 50 years. There was a plant in Algeria in 64 that intermittently sent gas to Europe, but ours was the one that was consistent time in and time out. So it wasn't Texas, and I love Texas, but it was Alaska that pioneered this.
You've been very gracious with your Texas comments.
I love Texas. I love Texas. It's a great town, a great place. A little smaller than Alaska, but a lot of things are smaller than Alaska. Anyway, so costs have always been higher. What we want to do, and this is what the Trump administration is doing, this is why we love the Trump administration, is they want to get those costs down by producing more. That's the abundance concept we talk about. More energy means it's cheaper, right? You're seeing this with oil, even though the price of oil, if it goes down, is going to hurt Alaska. It's going to hurt us because we're so reliant on oil. But nonetheless, a lot of us understand this. Now, with regard to gas, I think you're fully aware that we are marketing our Alaska natural gas pipeline, which would be the largest project ever in the Arctic and probably the spendiest project in the Pacific in terms of gas. We are very close. Our outfit, that's the private concern that's partnered with us, Glenfarne, is finishing up their FEED study on the pipe, the 800-mile pipe, and they're saying things are looking good. They'll announce in December what that FEED study shows, and from all indications, it's going to be economical. Then they'll go to FID in January, order pipe. We'll have pipe on the ground here in August. This will be a massive game changer for the state of Alaska. I mean, we'll be looking at, for industry, probably 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour for our residents, well below what we currently pay, especially along the rail belt where most of our people live.
And remind us again, I want to say that's like a $30 billion project, but that's off the top of my head. I mean, it's a massive project.
44 to 60 billion.
Wow. Okay.
44 to 60 billion. 20 million tons of gas per year, 3.2 BCF per day. And the gas, we think the horizon for that gas is 50 years, could be 60, 70 years. The Trans-Alaska National Oil Pipeline was supposed to have been decommissioned decades ago. That may hit 100 years of having oil flow through it at the rate we're discovering new oil on the slope.
And the Japanese seem like they've been very strong proponents, a lot of interest, some MOUs and things like that. What else would you tell us about the international support or interest in that Glenfarne project?
Baker Hughes just signed a contract with the Alaska natural gas pipeline Glenfarne. That is gigantic. These guys are the ones that do the compressors and a lot of the components for natural gas pipelines. They were the ones that supplied Yamal up in Russia to get that thing up and going. So they're not going to do that unless, from what they've seen and got into our data room, what they've seen is a pipeline that's viable. So not only that, but I think they're going to, they might even look at some off takes on this. So that's huge having them there. POSCO, which is a big Korean firm that deals with components as well, including pipe, they've been into pretty much an LOI, and we believe that's going to go to a hard agreement here over the next month. JERA's in conversations and has agreed to further those conversations. I think in the next month and a half, you're going to see a number of announcements that prove that this pipeline is going to be viable economically. And that's beside the Trump administration support for this. We were the only project in the state that was mentioned by President Trump. We go back and we meet with Trump officials probably once a month for a couple of days or once every month and a half. Very bullish on this for defense purposes, for the economics for America. We need the gas for our bases here in Alaska. So I think things are looking great for that.
Governor, in your introduction, you talked about you had gone over to the UAE last year and you said, quote, you said, "What a vision." right? And I
Yes.
think, a lot of people look at that. They look at Saudi Arabia's vision out to 2030. And, 4 or 5 years ago when they put that out, people said, this is crazy. This just can't be done. And it looks like they're on the road to getting that done. I guess my question is, what do you see as your vision for Alaska? I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but if you're going to say, hey, next 3 to 5 years is maybe this, this pipeline, but what is it 5 to 10 years down the road? What's your vision?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that question. So Alaska, because of its large contiguous acres of land, because of our low cost energy that will come online because of this gas line, because of we have 3 times the fresh water of any other state in the country, because of our ambient temperatures, we are, I believe, the future for AI data farm location, to be perfectly honest with you, to diversify the data farms between Texas and Loudoun County and Virginia and other places. Our PUE, our power unit equivalent, for example, if you have a 1 gigawatt plant in Texas consuming 1 gigawatt of energy, and you have the same plant in Alaska, because of the power unit power unit equivalent unit equivalent, you're going to save several $100 million a year on energy costs in Alaska, because you don't have to build to expel heat in Alaska. You can build, I think, a cheaper building because you don't have to put all the a cooling apparatus in it. And for every dollar you spend on energy in Texas, you got to spend about 35 cents to cool. In Alaska, that's more like 5 cents. So given that, and then we are embarking upon, you'll hear about this over the next year or so, we want to be the data transportation capital of the world. Why do I say that? Data coming up from North America to Alaska, going to Asia, going to Europe, over the Arctic, would cut the speed of that data transportation significantly. So imagine a world where you've got fiber coming from Europe over the under the Arctic Ocean to Alaska with offtakes, more fiber, dedicated fiber coming up from the lower 48 to Alaska, and then fiber going over to Yokohama, Japan. So it ties Asia, Europe, and North America. And right there is Alaska, right in the middle of that tie-out. So I would say data is going to be huge. And I want to say one thing about the Emiratis, because to me it was fascinating. I think for most of human history, until recently, we bump into the future, meaning we stumble into the future. We can predict it a little bit, but we stumble into it. The thing that was fascinating about the Emiratis is they actually believe they can create the future. They actually believe they can get ahead of it. Ahead of oil, ahead of gas, whether it's trade, whether it's AI, whether it's medicine, whether it's medical, whether it's research, they believe they can get far ahead of it. And I got to take my hat off to them. They don't have an EPA. They don't have an Army Corps of Engineers they got to deal with. They don't have a Congress that sometimes works and most of the time doesn't. But nonetheless, you got to give them credit for that vision. And that vision, I think, is something for all of us to look at. I think the future is going to belong to those that create the future, not just bump into it. And that's what Alaska wants to do.
Governor, you've had 5 or 6 comments. We usually find 1 or 2 that we can use to title the segment. We're not done yet. You've already had 6. I was going to ask you one sort of slightly different question, which is a detailed one. The Army Corps of Engineers, you've mentioned them a few times. We don't have any experience with what it's like to deal with them. We don't know how they're run. We don't know what they're part of. We don't know who they listen to. Do you mind just talking a little bit more about that group? Because this is a new area for us.
Well, they're the ones that issue the 404 permits, basically the water permits, and the ability to build in a place like Alaska. And so I'll give you an example. There was a preemptive veto on a 404 permit for Pebble Mine. Pebble Mine is estimated to have $1 trillion with a T, $1 trillion worth of wealth, gold, copper, you name it. One of the largest finds on the planet, and it's on state land, not federal land, state land. So there was a preemptive veto of that under the Biden administration, and that has stopped that project. Now, if we can get that preemptive veto lifted, we can get back to using science to determine whether the mine there will actually not just be a benefit, but be environmentally sound. When you start to politicize projects by not even letting them get finished through the research stage, the permitting stage, so that everything is looked at, scrutinized. If you just decide emotionally, you don't, there's a sticker up here for those that don't like Pebble. It's like the wrong mind at the wrong time, or the wrong mind at the wrong place. You start to politicize things and make it an emotional issue, you run the risk of shutting down a whole host of things that would be significant for this country and this world. And so Army Corps is key. I keep mentioning Army Corps and EPA. Those are key. DOI is key. But for Alaska, if we can't get the permit, you can't have a project. And that's what happened with Pebble.
I think this is what you're pointing out, that to the uninitiated like myself, the Corps, you think of them as like great civil engineers or people who help accomplish great projects, but there's a regulatory component to it that people don't appreciate here.
That's correct. And that's why we live or die on regulations and permitting in Alaska, and have for decades, unfortunately. Texas, again, very different, very little federal land, and very dry compared to Alaska. So water and wetlands were not really an issue per se in Texas. So a lot of benefits Texas had over Alaska. Again, Trump administration is trying to give us these opportunities. We believe that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, at least over the next several years, will again become opportunities for Alaska under the Trump administration. But again, it's the codifying by Congress that's going to be the long-term play for everybody.
So do you have any advice? You're around so many of these things, but whether it's the SEC, the Fed, the Army Corps, there are all these agencies, the FERC. There are all these agencies that are supposed to be non-political, neutral, just do their jobs. And the trend has been that these things have gotten more political, more politicized. How do we bring back, call it bipartisanship or neutrality, or how do we get those organizations to get back out of the fight, if you will?
Another case that happened was Chevron, right, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the agencies can't just make up their own laws with regard to acts of Congress, and that basically it's thrown that concept in limbo, where somebody deep in the bowels of EPA could say, no, I don't think so. I don't think I like that project. And then that becomes the rule for that particular project, oftentimes killing it. Chevron, and there's probably got to be some more work done on Chevron in Congress, but basically if Congress passes a law, then that's the law. In other words, you got to eliminate ambiguity. Wherever there's ambiguity, you're going to get a bureaucrat. And I don't mean that in a negative. There's good people that work in government, but nonetheless, you're going to be subjected to their subjectiveness on an issue. If it's not clear, if it's not unambiguous, you run the risk of people coming up with different decisions looking at the same thing. That's the problem.
Do you think, I hadn't thought about it till you just said this, but so you made the case for let's don't have ambiguous laws, but said another way, if we don't have ambiguous laws and people realize if I'm in government, I'm going to have a narrow fairway, it's either legal or not, then government will stop drawing individuals into its ranks who hope to implement whatever passion they have.
And those individuals should never be in those ranks, because that's what elections are for. And that's what President Trump was trying to say. And as a governor, you could talk to Governor Shapiro, Governor Stitt, Governor Newsom, Governor Dunleavy. When you run a camp, this is America. This is why it's different than, for example, the UAE and other places. But when you run a campaign, and if your campaign is, we're going to produce more resources, we're going to get cheap energy, we're going to streamline infrastructure, and the people vote for you, no bureaucrat has the right to go into an organization and say, I don't think so. They never got a vote. They never were in a position to be elected. Their job is to carry out the mandate that the people put forward in that is embodied in that elected official, whether it's a president or a governor or a legislator. Their job is to say, how do we make this happen? Not, I don't think so. And that's the problem with a lot. That's the deep state. The deep state is supposed to not be a deep state. It's supposed to I got a project in front of me. It checks the box. Next project, not, oh, Pebble Mine. It's in Alaska. Alaska's pristine. Alaska's beautiful. My father used to go fishing there. I have a lodge up there. I don't really want a mine here. So I'm going to try and get folks in the bowels to kill the project. Should never be that way, ever.
Okay, one last curveball. Mike mentioned it up front. There's talk that Russia and Ukraine, maybe we're getting closer. Who knows? That there was that incredible, I say incredible, meaning scenic and unprecedented summit between Trump and Putin up in Russia. You guys interact with the Russian border all the time, planes, all this kind of stuff. Any take on that experience when Trump and Putin were there, and any take on the probability that we could finally get a resolution to this deal? I know it's a little bit outside your day to day, but you've been involved with Alaska being at the center of that discussion anyway.
Well, Alaska is America and North America's actual true fort. We're on the frontier, as you said. We're 2.5 miles from Russia. You can literally see Russia from Alaska. That's two islands, the Diomede Islands. Big Diomede's Russian, Little Diomede's American. But nonetheless, you're 50 miles coastline to coastline. We deal with the Russians all the time. We were Russian America. I mean, we were owned by the Russians. We were purchased in 1867 for $7.2 million. We were Russian.
Well, we learned earlier this year, Greenland could have been a part of the deal, and we could have avoided the current tiff.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, fortunately for us, we got Alaska. I think Alaska's a better deal than Greenland, but that's a discussion for another time. We've always been a well-armed state because of our proximity to our neighbors, and that's going to become more so. I think that'll be the next discussion over the next several years is how much more do we put assets into Alaska, because the Chinese now are creating an Arctic presence as well through their ships and their navy. How do we deal with the North Koreans? We are under the North Korean nuclear missile umbrella here in Alaska, and we have interceptors here. So we are truly the fort for America. And what people forget, again, Maynard, is we are America's Arctic state. There's no doubt about it. We are America's North Pacific state. There's no doubt about it. But we really are America's Western Pacific state. We are so far west. We are 1,000 miles closer to Australia than California is. We are closer to Asia than Hawaii is. People don't understand this. They just think of us as a cold place on the top of the world. We are 9 hours by plane to any industrialized place in the Northern Hemisphere. We can get to Frankfurt, Germany in 8.5 hours. You get we can. That's why Putin came here. 2 reasons. 1, relatively short flight. 2, very little international airspace to go over. It's just America and Russia, right? Because he's wanted in some countries for some war criminal charges. But nonetheless, what do I see happening up here? I see Alaska becoming a stronger position in the Pacific and the Arctic for America and for its allies, for the reasons I mentioned. And whether it's energy, whether it's minerals, whether it's other resources, whether it's data transportation. I mean, for NATO to have a dedicated fiber line to America and to Asia, you're going to get real-time information coming over from our neck of the woods to Europe faster than you can going through North America and the East Coast. So whole host of things. What people don't also realize, Maynard, is we do have the second busiest cargo airport in the U.S. and third busiest in the world in Anchorage, Alaska. Our university was the first to launch rockets in space in the world in 1965. We do have a spaceport here that launches rockets and satellites into orbit here in Alaska. So Alaska is we've just scratched the surface of what this state has to offer our country in this world.
Well, we got to ask you, you and Rose and your girls, what are you guys doing for Thanksgiving? I'm guessing there's some good food coming your way.
We had a sort of a Thanksgiving dinner a week and a half ago because all 3 of my girls work at Red Dog Mine, which is one of the largest lead zinc mines in the world, and they're on 2-week rotations. One's an engineer, one's a buyer, one's a logistics officer, and so those 3 girls will be up at the mine on their shift during Thanksgiving. So Rose and I will get a little turkey, and we'll probably watch some Twilight Zone reruns late at night for an hour or 2.
Hey, there's not many guys who can say I've got three daughters and they're minors. I mean, that's
Yeah,
cool. Who can say that?
very few people. I think I'm the only governor that's got three daughters that are minors in the Arctic.
Well, we greatly appreciate our friendship with you. Thanks to you and your team for making this possible. Thanks for your leadership on all these issues. You've been speaking out, speaking your mind, which is so refreshing. We just really appreciate our relationship.
Maynard, we want you to come up to our energy conference, the same energy conference that Doug and Lee
John,
and Chris Wright came up, and that's late May. But it's going
okay.
to be a big one this year. It's my last energy conference. I started this 4 years ago. This will be my last one because I'm leaving office here in less than about a year. But I think by that time you're going to hear so many things about our minerals. That gas line will be a real deal. A whole host of things. So having you come up and do some reporting for your folks, I think it'd be great.
Done. That's a
All right.
promise.
All right.
Mike,
Bring
anything?
Mike with you. Don't leave
Mike, you
Mike
look like
out.
you were going to say something. Well, Mike's in Panama. Mike, can we get you to Alaska?
Count me in.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you,
right, guys.
Governor. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.